Kethavar had seen many species prepare for war across the galaxy. The methodical Zephyrians with their calculated battle formations, the fierce Krelthan warriors who roared and beat their chests before charging, the silent Vorthak assassins who meditated in perfect stillness, but nothing had prepared him for watching humans get ready to fight. The Galactic Council had assigned him as an observer when the human colony ship New Horizon requested military assistance against the Ravager swarms threatening their outer settlements. His job was simple: watch, learn, and report back on human combat capabilities. The Council needed to know if these newcomers could truly contribute to galactic defense or if they were just another weak species requiring protection. Kethavar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he stood on the bridge of the human vessel. Captain Sarah Chen had been polite enough when he boarded, explaining their situation with professional courtesy. The Ravagers had already consumed 3 outer mining stations, turning the colonists into mindless drones for their hive mind. Standard procedure for most species would be to evacuate and call for backup. But humans, it seemed, had different ideas. Observer Kethavar, Captain Chen approached him, her voice calm despite the approaching threat. "We'll be engaging the enemy in 6 hours. You're welcome to monitor from here or accompany our ground teams." Kethavar's tentacles curled with interest. "Ground teams? Captain, surely you don't intend to board Ravager vessels? That's considered suicide by every tactical manual in the galaxy." A strange expression crossed the human's face. Her lips curved upward slightly, what humans called a smile, though this one seemed different from the friendly gestures he'd observed earlier. "Observer, you might want to stick around. I think you'll find our approach educational." Over the next hour, Kethavar watched the ship transform. What had been a peaceful colony vessel became something else entirely. Hidden compartments opened, revealing weapons that definitely weren't standard civilian equipment. Cargo bays converted into armories. Even the botanical gardens were repurposed, with plants moved aside to make room for combat staging areas. But it wasn't the weapons that caught his attention. It was the humans themselves. The crew of 300 began gathering in small groups. They sat in circles, sharing what appeared to be food and drink. Some told stories that made others laugh loudly. Others remained quiet, staring at small pictures or objects they pulled from their pockets. A few wrote on paper, actual paper, which Kethavar found fascinating since most species had abandoned physical writing centuries ago. "Letters home," Captain Chen explained, noticing his interest. "Some write to family, others to people they'll never see again. A few write to themselves." "I don't understand," Kethavar admitted. "Why write letters before battle? Shouldn't they be training or reviewing tactical data?" "They already know their jobs," Chen replied. "What they're doing now is remembering why those jobs matter." In one corner, a group of Marines sat cleaning their weapons with an almost religious attention to detail. Every bolt, every spring, every surface was inspected and re-inspected. They worked in silence, but Kethavar could see them exchange glances, nods, subtle hand signals. It was like watching a ritual performed by a warrior cult. Nearby, other humans engaged in what they called PT, physical training. But this wasn't the aggressive posturing Kethavar expected. Instead, they moved through precise, controlled exercises, push-ups, pull-ups, running in place. Their movements were methodical, almost meditative. Sweat poured down their faces, but their expressions remained focused, distant. "They're getting their bodies ready," Chen explained. "But more than that, they're getting their minds right." As the hours passed, Kethavar noticed changes in the humans' behavior. The casual conversations became shorter. The laughter died down. People began checking their equipment more frequently, touching weapons and armor like talismans. They looked at each other differently too. Longer glances, firmer handshakes, embraces that lasted just a moment too long. "Captain," Kethavar ventured, "your crew seems to be experiencing some form of distress. Perhaps anxiety about the coming battle?" Chen studied her people with those strange human eyes. "No, observer. They're not distressed. They're preparing themselves for what they'll have to do, and what they'll have to see." 3 hours before engagement, something shifted. The humans stopped their various activities and began suiting up in combat gear. But as they did, their faces changed. The expressions that had been animated with conversation or focused on tasks began to empty. Not empty like fear or confusion, Empty, like a vast space had opened up behind their eyes. Kethavar watched a young Marine named Torres helping his squad mate check armor plates. 20 minutes earlier, Torres had been joking and smiling. Now his face showed nothing. His eyes looked through his friend rather than at him. He performed the equipment check perfectly, his hands moving with practiced precision, but he seemed to be somewhere else entirely. "What's happening to them?" Kethavar asked, genuine concern creeping into his voice. Captain Chen was strapping on her own sidearm, and when she looked up, Kethavar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. Those same empty, distant eyes were looking back at him, not hostile, not afraid, but utterly removed from the present moment. "They're going to that place," she said quietly. "The place where you can do what needs to be done without it destroying you. Every human warrior learns to find it one way or another." Kethavar's species had excellent vision, evolved for tracking movement across vast plains. He could see details that most other species missed. So when he looked around the preparation area now, he saw hundreds of humans all wearing the same expression, empty eyes that seemed to be staring at something infinitely far away. Something only they could see. The silence was complete now. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary for their preparations. Tools and weapons moved with efficient precision, but the humans wielding them seemed like ghosts operating familiar machinery. Present but not present, ready but not eager. For the first time since arriving aboard the human vessel, Kethavar felt truly afraid. Not of the coming battle. He was safely positioned as an observer, but afraid of the creatures surrounding him who had just stopped being the friendly, talkative beings he'd been getting to know. They were still human. But they were something else now, too. Something that made his ancient predator-prey instinct scream warnings into the deepest parts of his brain. 2 hours remained before engagement, and Kethavar found himself studying the humans with the intensity of a xenobiologist discovering a new species. Because in many ways that's exactly what he was doing. These weren't the same humans who had welcomed him aboard 12 hours ago. The transformation continued in ways that defied his understanding of pre-combat psychology. In the main hangar bay, he watched Sergeant Maria Santos methodically disassemble and reassemble her rifle for the 4th time. Her movements were precise, automatic, but her eyes never focused on the weapon itself. Instead, she stared past it, through it, at something that existed beyond the physical world around her. "Muscle memory," explained Lieutenant Commander Roberts when Kethavar asked. Roberts was preparing his own gear nearby, loading magazines with the same distant precision. Santos could strip that rifle blindfolded in a thunderstorm. She's not checking the weapon, she's checking herself. Kethavar didn't understand the distinction, but he filed it away for his report. Everything these humans did seemed to have layers of meaning that escaped him. In another section, he observed Corporal Jackson sitting alone, holding a small device that projected holographic images. Pictures of humans in various poses, some young, some old, all smiling. Jackson stared at each image for exactly 30 seconds before moving to the next. His face remained expressionless, but Kethavar noticed the human's breathing had become slower, deeper. "Family," Jackson said without looking up, somehow sensing the alien's curiosity. "Wife, kids, mom and dad, my brother Tommy." His voice was flat, emotionless, but his finger traced the edge of the projector with infinite care. "Making sure I remember what I'm fighting for when things get ugly." "And does this help you prepare for combat?" Kethavar asked. Jackson finally looked at him, and those empty, distant eyes made Kethavar step back involuntarily. "No. It helps me prepare for what comes after combat, assuming there is an after." Across the bay, a group of humans had formed a circle. They passed around a bottle containing some kind of liquid, each taking a small drink before handing it to the next person. But this wasn't celebration, it was solemn, ritualistic. As each human drank, the others watched in silence. Some nodded. A few placed hands on the drinker's shoulder. No one spoke. "What is this ceremony?" Kethavar inquired of a passing technician. "Old Earth whiskey," the technician replied. "Chief Harrison's grandmother's recipe. She made it herself before she died. He saved that bottle for 20 years. The human paused in his work, watching the circle with something approaching reverence. "Says it connects them to home, to the people who came before." Kethavar observed that each human only took the smallest possible sip. Barely enough to taste. This wasn't about intoxication. It was about connection. Continuity? He struggled to find words in his language for what he was witnessing. Near the medical bay, he discovered another group engaged in what appeared to be mutual grooming. But unlike the social grooming he'd observed in other species, this was different. Humans checked each other's armor seals, tested communication equipment, verified weapon systems. Their hands moved over each other's gear with practiced efficiency, but their touches lingered just slightly longer than purely functional contact required. Trust exercises, explained Medical Officer Kim when Kethavar approached. Making sure everyone's gear is squared away, but also making physical contact. Humans are contact-oriented creatures, especially before trauma. We need to know our packmates are real, solid, present. The word packmates stuck in Kethavar's mind. He'd studied human social structures during his preparation for this assignment. Humans weren't pack hunters like some species. They were persistence hunters, endurance predators. But here, in these moments before battle, they were definitely acting like a pack. In the quieter corners of the ship, he found humans engaged in activities that seemed almost mystical. Some sat in meditation, but unlike the peaceful meditation he'd observed in other species, this was focused, purposeful. They weren't seeking calm, they were seeking something else. Their breathing was controlled, their postures rigid with concentration. One Marine, Corporal Hayes, sat cross-legged with her eyes closed, her lips moving silently. Kethavar couldn't hear the words, but the rhythm suggested some kind of chant or prayer. When she opened her eyes, they held that same 1,000-yard stare, but now it seemed deeper, more intentional. "What were you doing?" he asked. "Visiting the place I'll need to go," she replied simply. "The place where I can kill without hesitation and die without fear. Making sure I can still find the path when the shooting starts." Other humans wrote in journals or on small pieces of paper. Unlike the letters home, these writings seemed different. Some wrote in rapid bursts, their hands moving urgently across the pages. Others wrote slowly, carefully, as if each word required significant consideration. A few wrote and then immediately destroyed what they'd written, burning the papers in small metal containers. "What do they write?" Kethavar asked Captain Chen, who was observing her crew with the same distant attention they gave their preparations. "Confessions," she said. "Promises, threats, things they need to say but can't say out loud. Some write to God, some to dead friends, some to the enemy they're about to face. It doesn't matter who it's for. It matters that it gets out of their heads and onto something external." Kethavar watched one young soldier crumple up his paper and stuff it into his armor's chest pocket. "Why keep it if it's meant to be external?" "Because sometimes you need to carry it with you," Chen replied. "And sometimes you need to leave it behind. They'll figure out which when the time comes." As the final hour approached, the humans began what they called gear checks. But Kethavar realized this was another ritual disguised as practical necessity. Each person was checked by two others, once by someone of equal rank, once by someone senior. The checkers didn't just verify equipment function, they looked into each other's eyes, spoke quiet words, sometimes embraced briefly. "We're making sure everyone's head is in the right place," explained Sergeant Santos when Kethavar observed her checking a younger Marine's gear. "You can have perfect equipment and still die if your mind isn't ready. We're checking for fear, for doubt, for anything that might get someone killed. And if you find such things," Santos looked at him with those empty, knowing eyes, "then we fix them. Or we leave that person behind. There's no shame in not being ready. There's only shame in lying about it." The most disturbing part was how normal it all seemed to them. These weren't emergency procedures or panic responses. This was routine, practiced, refined through countless repetitions. Every human knew their role in these preparations, moved through them with the smooth efficiency of a well-maintained machine. But they weren't machines. Kethavar could see that clearly now. They were something far more dangerous. They were thinking, feeling beings who had learned to voluntarily shut down the parts of themselves that would prevent them from doing terrible, necessary things, and they were almost ready to begin. When the final preparations ended, Kethavar found himself surrounded by 300 humans who looked identical despite their different faces. Empty eyes, relaxed postures, weapons held with casual familiarity. They stood ready to board shuttles that would carry them into hell, and they looked like they were waiting for public transportation. Captain Chen appeared beside him, her own transformation complete. "Questions, Observer?" "Just one," Kethavar managed. Are they still human? Chen's empty eyes regarded him for a long moment. Ask me after the battle, observer. The answer might surprise you. The final hour had arrived, and Kethvar found himself studying individual human faces with growing fascination and horror. The transformation was complete now, but it was the eyes that truly disturbed him. He'd seen many expressions across his long career observing different species: fear, rage, determination, bloodlust. But what he saw in human eyes defied every category he understood. Private Chen, no relation to the captain, stood near the shuttle bay doors, checking her weapon one final time. Kethvar positioned himself where he could observe her face directly. 24 hours ago, this same human had shown him pictures of her pet animal, something called a dog, with genuine enthusiasm and joy. Her eyes had sparkled with life and humor. Now those same eyes looked like empty windows in an abandoned building, not dead, not unconscious, but vacant in a way that suggested the person behind them had simply stepped away, gone somewhere else while leaving the body to handle immediate business. Private Chen, Kethvar addressed her directly. She turned toward him with mechanical precision. Yes, observer? Her voice was perfectly normal. Proper intonation, appropriate volume, complete sentence structure. But it was like listening to a recording of Private Chen rather than the person herself. Are you present? He asked, struggling to find the right words. I'm here, she replied, but her eyes were focused on a point approximately 3 feet behind and to the left of his head. Ready for mission execution. But where are you really? For the first time, her gaze sharpened slightly, actually focusing on him for a brief moment. Somewhere safe, she said quietly. Somewhere I can watch what needs to happen without it touching me. She returned to her equipment check, and the empty look settled back over her features like a mask. But now Kethvar understood that's exactly what it was, a mask. Not hiding emotion, but hiding the person who would normally feel those emotions. Across the shuttle bay, Sergeant Martinez was briefing his squad one final time. But as Kethvar watched, he realized the briefing was meaningless. These humans had already received their tactical information hours ago. They knew their objectives, their contingencies, their backup plans. This wasn't about information transfer. Martinez spoke in calm, measured tones about entry points and target priorities, but his eyes swept across his team with mechanical regularity. He wasn't checking for understanding. He was checking for presence, making sure the people he needed were still accessible somewhere behind those empty stairs. Rodriguez, acknowledge, Martinez said. Acknowledged, Sergeant, came the response. Rodriguez's voice was steady, professional, completely devoid of personality. Williams, acknowledge. Acknowledged, Sergeant. Each response was identical in tone and cadence, like a machine running a diagnostic check on its components. Kethvar approached Corporal Thompson, who stood motionless near a weapon rack. The human's eyes were fixed on something far beyond the ship's hull, something only she could see. Corporal Thompson, what are you looking at? She didn't turn her head, didn't acknowledge his presence for nearly 30 seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, dreamy. The place where I keep the things I've done. Making sure the door is still locked. What things? Things that would break the person I am when I'm home. Things that are necessary here but poisonous there. Her eyes finally shifted to meet his, and Kethvar felt ice form in his core chambers. We all have that place, observer. The difference is, humans learn to visit it voluntarily. She returned to her 1,000-yard stare, and Kethvar backed away slowly. Near the medical station, he observed Dr. Yanis preparing trauma kits with the same distant efficiency. But what caught his attention wasn't her medical preparations. It was how other humans interacted with her. They approached differently than they had hours earlier. Slower movements, softer voices, longer eye contact before speaking. Doctor, said a Marine named Patterson, requesting pre-combat evaluation. Dr. Yanis looked at Patterson for a full 10 seconds, her eyes searching the Marine's face with clinical precision. Mental state? Locked and loaded, Doc, ready to do the job. Emotional connectivity? Severed. Clean separation achieved. Conscience accessibility? Filed away until mission completion. Dr. Yanis nodded once. Cleared for combat operations. Remember the way back, Patterson. Always do. Doc? Kethvar realized he was witnessing a psychological checklist. a confirmation that each human had successfully performed some kind of internal surgery on themselves. They were verifying that they had temporarily disabled the parts of their minds that would interfere with violence. The most disturbing example came when he observed two humans who had clearly formed an emotional bond, romantic partners, he believed. Private Kumar and Specialist Davis stood facing each other near the shuttle ramp, but they weren't saying goodbye the way other species might. Instead, they simply looked at each other for a long moment, memorizing faces that might change or disappear entirely after the coming battle. "See you on the other side," Kumar said quietly. "If there is an other side," Davis replied. They didn't embrace, didn't kiss, didn't even touch. They just nodded once and turned away from each other. But Kethavar caught something in that moment, a flicker of pain in their eyes, quickly suppressed but unmistakably real. The people they loved were still in there, locked away but not destroyed. Captain Chen's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All hands, prepare for combat insertion. Enemy contact in 15 minutes. The effect on the assembled humans was immediate and universal. The last traces of individual personality vanished from their faces. They moved with identical efficiency toward their assigned positions. 300 different people became 300 copies of the same warrior prototype, but it was their eyes that truly disturbed Kethavar now. He finally understood what he was seeing in that 1,000-yard stare. It wasn't emptiness or absence. It was distance. These humans had moved their consciousness, their essential selves, to a safe place deep inside while leaving their bodies and training to handle the immediate situation. They were all still there, still aware, still thinking and feeling, but they were experiencing everything from a great remove, like watching events happen to someone else. This allowed them to perform acts of violence and witness acts of horror without immediate psychological damage. "It's a survival mechanism," Dr. Yanez explained when he asked her directly. "Most species either embrace violence or reject it. Humans do both simultaneously. We separate the doer from the experiencer, the actor from the witness. It lets us be monsters when necessary while preserving the person who has to live with the consequences afterward." "But how do you learn such a thing?" "Practice," she said simply. "Lots and lots of practice. Some humans never master it. They wash out of combat roles. Others learn it too well and can't find their way back. But most of us," she gestured at the assembled warriors, "most of us learn to walk that line." As the final countdown began, Kethavar watched the humans perform one last ritual. Each person placed their hand briefly on their heart, then touched their weapon, then looked once at the person nearest to them. A simple sequence, but performed with religious precision by every single individual. "What does that mean?" he asked Captain Chen. "Confirming the chain," she replied, her own eyes now holding that same infinite distance. "Heart to weapon to brother. Remember who you are. Remember what you carry. Remember who stands beside you." The shuttle bay doors began to open, revealing the star-filled void beyond. In the distance, Kethavar could see the dark shapes of Ravager vessels, writhing with unnatural movement as they consumed everything in their path. 300 humans looked at their approaching enemy with identical expressions of calm, professional interest, as if they were observing an engineering problem that required a technical solution, which, Kethavar realized with a chill that reached his core, was exactly how they were seeing it. The 1,000-yard stare wasn't just preparation for battle. It was preparation for becoming something other than human, long enough to do what humans wouldn't normally be capable of doing. And in just a few minutes, he was going to see exactly what that meant. As the human warriors prepared for shuttle deployment, Kethavar found himself overwhelmed by questions. How had an entire species learned to voluntarily disconnect from their own consciousness? Where did this ability come from? Most species either evolved as natural predators or natural prey. They didn't typically develop the capacity to switch between states at will. Dr. Yanez, he approached the medical officer during the final preparations. "I need to understand something. This psychological state your people achieve. It's not natural evolution, is it?" Dr. Yanez paused in her equipment check, her distant eyes focusing on him with effort. "What do you know about human history, observer?" "Only the basics from council records. You achieved space travel relatively recently. Before that, you were confined to a single planet." "One planet," she nodded. "One planet where we spent over 100,000 years learning to kill each other." Her voice carried no emotion, but something cold moved behind her eyes. Do you want to know how humans learned to do this? Really want to know? Kethavar's tentacles curled with nervous anticipation. Yes. Computer, Dr. Yanez called to the ship's AI. Display human military history timeline. Educational protocol. A holographic display materialized between them, showing a three-dimensional representation of Earth. Tiny lights began appearing across the surface, thousands of them, then millions flickering like stars. Each light represents a significant armed conflict, Dr. Yanez explained. Wars, battles, sieges, campaigns. This covers roughly the last 10,000 years of recorded human history. Kethavar watched in horror as the planet seemed to catch fire. Lights blazed across every continent, clustering around population centers, spreading along trade routes, erupting in waves across entire regions. The display was beautiful and terrible. Earth looked like a jewel covered in burning scars. You fought constantly, he whispered. Constantly, she confirmed. We fought over territory, resources, ideas, gods, pride, revenge, and sometimes just because we'd forgotten why we started fighting in the first place. Show him the numbers, computer. Text appeared alongside the display. Estimated number of major human conflicts, 14,000 plus. Estimated military casualties, 1.2 billion. Estimated civilian casualties, 2.8 billion. Kethavar's four eyes widened in shock. Those numbers represented a significant percentage of total human population across their entire history. 4 billion dead, Dr. Yanez said quietly. 4 billion humans who died violently at the hands of other humans. And that's just the ones we have records for. She gestured to the display, which now showed a closer view of specific conflicts. Computer, show educational examples. Start with ancient warfare. The display shifted to show human warriors from different eras. Ancient soldiers with bronze weapons, medieval knights in heavy armor, colonial troops with early firearms. But what struck Kethavar wasn't the weapons or tactics, it was the faces. Even in these historical recreations, he could see hints of that same distant stare. Early human warfare was brutal and personal, Dr. Yanez explained. Men stood face to face with swords and spears, looking into their enemies' eyes as they killed them. They saw blood, heard screams, felt their weapons penetrate flesh and bone. Most species would have developed trauma responses that prevented further combat effectiveness. But humans didn't? Oh, we did. We definitely did. Computer, show trauma documentation. New images appeared, ancient texts, medieval accounts, historical records, all describing the same phenomena. Warriors who couldn't sleep, who started at sudden noises, who couldn't readjust to peaceful life. We called it different things throughout history, Dr. Yanez continued. Battle fatigue, shell shock, war neurosis, combat stress reaction, post-traumatic stress disorder. We've always known that war damages the mind, but we kept fighting anyway. Why? Because we had to. The display shifted to show maps of human migration, territorial expansion, resource competition. Earth was a harsh planet, observer. Limited resources, extreme weather, natural disasters, predators. Early humans lived in constant competition with each other and everything else. The tribes that couldn't fight effectively died out. The tribes that could fight but couldn't recover from combat trauma also died out. Kethavar began to understand. So you evolved psychological mechanisms to handle repeated exposure to violence. Exactly. But not just tolerance, adaptability. Computer, show the development of human military psychology. The display now showed a progression through human military history. Ancient warrior cultures, professional armies, modern military organizations. But the focus was on psychological training and support systems. We learned to prepare minds for war, Dr. Yanez explained. Training rituals, bonding exercises, group identity formation. We learned to create artificial family units, squads, platoons, companies, where loyalty to comrades could override individual survival instincts. Images showed human soldiers throughout history engaging in the same types of pre-combat rituals Kethavar had just observed. Sharing food and drink, checking each other's equipment, writing letters home, staring into distances only they could see. But the real breakthrough came when we learned to compartmentalize, she continued, to separate the part of the mind that experiences violence from the part that has to live with the memory afterward. The 1,000-yard stare, among other techniques. Computer, show clinical documentation. Medical files appeared, case studies, and psychological evaluations spanning centuries. Kethavar saw the same phenomenon described repeatedly. Warriors who could function effectively in combat while protecting their core personality from immediate psychological damage. We learned to send our essential selves away during violence, Dr. Yanez said, like passengers in a vehicle, watching events happen to the driver. The body and training handle the immediate situation while the person observes from a safe distance. But surely this causes long-term damage. Sometimes. Computers show recovery statistics. New data appeared showing success rates for various psychological treatments and support systems. The numbers were surprisingly high. Most human warriors could successfully reintegrate into civilian life given proper support. We also learned to bring people back, Dr. Yanez explained. Debriefing protocols, counseling systems, reintegration programs. The same species that learned to compartmentalize trauma also learned to heal from it. The display shifted to show modern human military training. Kethavar watched recorded sessions where humans practiced the same psychological techniques he'd just witnessed. Young recruits learning to access that distant mental state, experienced instructors teaching them how to find their way back to normal consciousness afterward. Every human warrior learns these techniques, Dr. Yanez continued. How to go away without getting lost. How to do terrible things without becoming terrible people. How to kill without being destroyed by the act of killing. And this is standard training? Standard training for combat personnel, yes. But the basic mechanisms exist in all humans to some degree. We're a species that learned to live with necessary violence while preserving our capacity for peace. The display showed one final image. Modern human colonies, peaceful and prosperous, defended by the same warriors who could transform into killers at need. Children playing in gardens protected by people who could become monsters in their defense. That's what you're seeing in my crew, Dr. Yanez concluded. 100,000 years of evolutionary pressure and cultural development, all focused on one goal, the ability to become what we need to become while remaining who we choose to be. Kethavar stared at the display as it faded away. How many other species have developed such capabilities? According to Galactic Council records, none. Most species either evolved past the need for personal violence or remained trapped in perpetual warfare. Humans are apparently unique in learning to master violence without being mastered by it. A new alarm sounded. Throughout the ship, final deployment warning. Dr. Yanez returned to her equipment with renewed focus, but Kethavar could see her slipping back into that distant mental state. One more question, he said quickly. Do you ever fear that you might go too far? Become the monsters permanently? Dr. Yanez paused at the shuttle door, her eyes already holding that infinite distance. Every single day, she said quietly. That's how we know we're still human. Then she was gone, boarding the shuttle with her transformed comrades, leaving Kethavar to wonder if he was watching the most terrifying or most admirable species in the galaxy. Possibly both. The shuttle bay erupted into controlled chaos as 300 human warriors moved toward their deployment vehicles. But it wasn't the frantic chaos Kethavar expected before battle. It was choreographed, precise, almost mechanical in its efficiency. Observer, Captain Chen's voice came through his communicator. You'll monitor the engagement from the bridge. Full tactical display and communication access. You'll see everything. Kethavar made his way to the bridge as the shuttles launched, their engines cutting blue trails through the darkness toward the Ravager fleet. The main display showed multiple feeds, tactical overviews, individual helmet cameras, shuttle bay monitors. He was about to witness human combat doctrine in action. The Ravager vessels hung in space like grotesque tumors, their organic hulls pulsing with unnatural life. They'd consumed 3 human mining stations, turning the facilities into hive nodes, connected by writhing tendrils of corrupted metal and flesh. Standard Galactic Council protocol would call for orbital bombardment from a safe distance. Humans, apparently, had different ideas. Shuttle Wing Alpha. Approaching Target Vessel 1, came a voice over the communication system. Kethavar recognized it as Sergeant Martinez, but the voice was utterly flat, emotionless. No visible defensive response. Proceeding with direct insertion. Through the helmet cameras, Kethavar watched the first shuttle approach the largest Ravager vessel. The organic hull writhed and shifted, but no weapons fired, no defensive measures activated. The Ravagers relied on close-range assimilation. They consumed enemies rather than destroying them, which, Kethavar realized, was exactly why humans were boarding their ships. Insertion commencing, Martinez reported. Hull breach in 3, 2, 1. The shuttle's cutting beam carved through organic armor like it was soft tissue. Immediately, the Ravager vessel's hull began trying to seal the breach, growing new tissue to close the wound. But the humans were faster. Go, go, go. Through multiple camera feeds, Kethvar watched human warriors pour through the breach into the alien vessel's interior. The environment was horrific. Walls that pulsed like living flesh, floors that shifted underfoot, air thick with spores and biological waste. The lighting came from bioluminescent growths that cast everything in sickly green and purple hues. But the humans moved through this nightmare landscape like they were walking through an office building. Contact. 12 o'clock. Private Chen's voice came through her helmet mic. Her camera showed a group of assimilated humans stumbling toward them, former colonists whose bodies had been corrupted by Ravager biotechnology. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their eyes replaced by clusters of sensor nodes, their mouths opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. What happened next shocked Kethvar to his core. The humans didn't hesitate. They didn't pause to mourn the fate of the assimilated colonists. They didn't show any emotional response whatsoever. They simply raised their weapons and opened fire. The assimilated humans fell in controlled bursts of gunfire, precise, efficient, utterly without mercy. Through Private Chen's camera, Kethvar watched her step over the body of what had clearly been a young colonist, maybe 16 years old, without breaking stride. Area secure, she reported in that same flat tone, proceeding to primary objective. Observer, Captain Chen said quietly beside him on the bridge. The people those Ravagers assimilated are already dead. Their bodies are just biological machinery now. My people know this. But Kethvar was watching more than just the tactical situation. He was watching the humans' faces through their helmet cameras. Those empty, distant eyes never changed. They looked at horrors that would traumatize most species as if they were examining technical problems. Sergeant, Martinez's team reached what appeared to be a central nervous cluster, a massive organic brain, connected to the ship's control systems by thick nerve cables. The thing was the size of a small building, pulsing with electric activity, clearly aware of their presence. Target acquired, Martinez reported. Deploying charges. The humans worked with mechanical precision, placing explosive devices at key points around the neural cluster. The Ravager brain began pulsing faster, emitting sounds like screaming that resonated through the ship's organic walls. Other assimilated humans converged on their position, dozens of them moving with increasing coordination as the hive mind focused its attention. Heavy contact incoming, reported Corporal Thompson. Estimate 60 hostiles, various configurations. Through her camera, Kethvar saw the approaching enemies. Some were barely recognizable as having once been human. Others had been so completely integrated with Ravager biotechnology that they moved on legs that bent in impossible directions, their arms replaced with cutting implements or projectile weapons grown from bone and cartilage. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Kethvar's experience. The humans didn't fight like warriors. They fought like a machine designed specifically for killing. Every movement was economical, purposeful. They didn't waste ammunition, didn't take unnecessary risks, didn't show fear or anger or any emotion at all. Private Rodriguez calmly shot an approaching assimilated human while simultaneously arming an explosive charge. When another enemy got close enough to slash her armor with bone claws, she simply reversed her rifle and drove the butt into its head with mechanical precision, then returned to her task. Corporal Hayes found herself surrounded by 3 assimilated colonists that had once been children. Without hesitation, she drew a combat knife and engaged in close-quarters combat. Through her helmet camera, Kethvar watched her systematically disable each opponent with surgical strikes to their nervous system implants. Charges armed, Martinez announced. All teams prepare for extraction. But the extraction wasn't a retreat. It was a fighting withdrawal, executed with the same mechanical precision as everything else. The humans moved through the ship's corridors like they were following a choreographed dance, each covering the others, every action supporting the overall mission. When the explosive charges detonated, the entire Ravager vessel convulsed. The organic hull began to collapse as the central nervous system was destroyed. Through external cameras, Kethvar watched the ship literally die, its bioluminescent glow fading as biological functions shut down. Shuttle Wing Alpha, mission complete. Martinez reported. Primary target neutralized. Proceeding to Target 2. And they did. For the next 6 hours, Kethvar watched human teams systematically assault and destroy 7 Ravager vessels. Each boarding action followed the same pattern. Precise insertion. Mechanical advancement through horror landscapes. Efficient elimination of all resistance. Completion of objectives. The humans never showed fatigue, never displayed emotional responses to the grotesque environments or the tragedy of fighting assimilated civilians. They moved through nightmare scenarios with the focused calm of professionals doing a job they'd trained for extensively. What truly disturbed Kethvar was how effective they were. Other species would have required massive fleets and overwhelming firepower to deal with a Ravager infestation. The humans had eliminated the entire threat with 300 warriors and some shuttlecraft. Final target secured, came the report from Dr. Yanez, who had been leading the medical team responsible for checking the mining stations for survivors. No recoverable personnel. All facilities cleared for demolition. Even the aftermath was handled with mechanical efficiency. The humans planted charges on the corrupted mining stations, destroying any trace of Ravager biotechnology. They collected samples for analysis, documented the engagement for future reference, and prepared for extraction. Throughout the entire battle, not one human had shown fear, rage, disgust, or any emotional response whatsoever. They had walked through hell and conducted business as usual. All teams returned to base, Captain Chen commanded. Mission successful. 0 casualties. As the shuttles returned to the ship, Kethvar found himself staring at the tactical display in stunned silence. In 6 hours, 300 humans had accomplished what most species would consider impossible. They had boarded enemy vessels in close quarters, fought through environment that would traumatize most warriors, killed enemies that had once been their own people, and completed their mission without losing a single person. And they had done it all while looking like they were having a perfectly ordinary day at work. Impressive, isn't it? Captain Chen asked, noting his expression. Terrifying, Kethvar replied honestly. That too, she agreed. Wait until you see them switch back. That's the really impressive part. The shuttles docked with mechanical precision, and Kethvar watched through security monitors as 300 human warriors disembarked in the same orderly fashion they had departed. They moved through decontamination procedures, weapon maintenance, and equipment return with the same emotionless efficiency they had displayed during the battle. But something was different. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely present. Medical evaluation all personnel, Dr. Yanez announced over the ship's communication system. Standard post-mission protocol. Form up by squad. Kethvar made his way to the main hangar bay, expecting to observe the same clinical efficiency he'd witnessed for the past 8 hours. Instead, he found something that made him stop in shock. The humans were talking, not the brief functional communications he'd heard during combat preparation and execution. Real conversation. Sergeant Martinez was describing the interior layout of the second Ravager vessel to a group of attentive listeners. Corporal Thompson was laughing, actually laughing, at something Private Rodriguez had said about the way one of the assimilated humans had moved. How's it feel to be back? Dr. Yanez asked Private Chen as she approached the medical station. Like waking up from a really long dream, Chen replied, and her voice carried actual personality again. Weird dream where everything was important but nothing mattered. Kethvar watched in fascination as Dr. Yanez conducted her examinations. These weren't medical checks for injuries or contamination. They were psychological evaluations, ensuring that each warrior had successfully returned from whatever mental place they'd visited during the battle. Emotional connectivity? Dr. Yanez asked each person. Re-established, came the responses. Empathy function? Online and operational. Conscience accessibility? Unlocked and integrated. It was like watching people retrieve parts of themselves they'd temporarily set aside. But the process wasn't automatic. Kethvar could see some humans struggling with the transition, their faces cycling between the empty expression he'd grown familiar with and something more natural. Corporal Hayes, you're showing delayed reintegration, Dr. Yanez noted, studying a young Marine who still had that distant look in her eyes. I know, Doc, just having trouble finding my way back. That last mining station, the kids. Dr. Yanez guided Hayes to a private area where other medical personnel waited. Kethvar heard quiet conversation, saw gentle touches, watched as trained specialists helped guide Hayes through whatever process was required to fully return to normal consciousness. It doesn't always work perfectly, Captain Chen explained, appearing beside Kethvar. Sometimes people get lost in that distant place. Sometimes they bring pieces of it back with them. That's why we have protocols. Across the bay, Kethvar observed other reunion rituals. Humans embraced each other with genuine warmth, completely different from the mechanical contact he'd witnessed before the battle. They shared food and drink again, but now with actual enjoyment rather than ritual purpose. Some cried, tears flowing freely as suppressed emotions returned. The most striking example was Private Kumar and Specialist Davis, the romantic partners he'd observed before deployment. They approached each other slowly, carefully, like strangers meeting for the first time. They studied each other's faces intently, searching for something. "Are you back?" Kumar asked quietly. "Getting there," Davis replied. "You?" "Almost." "Help me with the last bit?" They embraced then, but gently, tentatively. Kethvar realized they were helping each other complete the transition from the warriors they'd had to become, back to the people they chose to be. "Observer," Sergeant Martinez approached him, and Kethvar was startled to see actual warmth in the human's eyes. "Sorry if we seemed a bit distant earlier. Had to put on our game faces. Game faces? Our work masks. The person you wear when you have to do things that would break the person you really are." Martinez smiled, an expression Kethvar hadn't seen from any human for hours. Takes a while to take them off afterward. Around the hangar bay, Kethvar observed the systematic dismantling of their warrior personas. Humans shared stories from the battle, but not as tactical reports. They processed their experiences emotionally, talking through what they'd seen and done, helping each other contextualize the violence within their normal moral frameworks. That first group of assimilated colonists, Private Chen was saying to her squad, the young ones. "I keep seeing their faces. They weren't people anymore," Corporal Jackson replied gently. "The Ravagers had already killed them. We just stopped their bodies from being used as weapons." "I know that logically. It's just hard to feel it, you know?" "That's because you're a good person," Jackson said. "The day it stops being hard is the day we need to worry." Dr. Yanez moved through the groups, monitoring conversations, occasionally joining discussions to provide professional guidance. Kethvar realized this was as much a part of their military doctrine as the combat training itself. Structured psychological recovery. "Dr. Yanez," he approached her during a quiet moment, "how many of your people will have long-term effects from today's action?" "Statistically, about 15% will need ongoing counseling for various issues. 5% might develop chronic problems. 2% might never fully readjust." She looked around at her colleagues with genuine affection, but 93% will integrate this experience and continue as fully functional human beings. Those seem like acceptable losses. To most species, yes. To humans, she shook her head. We never accept those losses. We just acknowledge them and work to minimize them. Every single person who doesn't make it back all the way represents a failure of our support systems. Kethvar watched Corporal Hayes emerge from her counseling session. Her eyes clear and focused, her smile genuine. Other medical staff continued working with the few individuals who were experiencing reintegration difficulties. "The truly remarkable thing," Dr. Yanez continued, "isn't that we can become killers when necessary. Lots of species can do that. It's that we can stop being killers when it's no longer necessary. We can transform ourselves for specific purposes and then transform back." As the hours passed, Kethvar witnessed the complete metamorphosis of the human crew. The emotionless warriors who had efficiently destroyed 7 Ravager vessels became painters, musicians, engineers, teachers, parents. They shared photos of families again, told jokes, made plans for shore leave, complained about duty assignments. But there were subtle changes. Their eyes held a different depth now, as if they'd seen something that changed their perspective on normal life. They touched each other more frequently, brief contacts that seemed to confirm mutual presence and humanity. Their conversations carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "First time watching humans transition back?" Captain Chen asked. "Yes, it's remarkable. Are they the same people they were before?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Yes and no. They're the same people, but they've integrated a new experience. They know something now that they didn't know before. that they're capable of becoming exactly what they needed to become to protect what they value. And that knowledge changes them? It makes them more complete, she said. They understand the full range of human capability, both the capacity for terrible violence and the capacity to transcend that violence when it's no longer needed. Near the end of the recovery period, Kethvar observed something that truly astounded him. Several humans approached their comrades who had shown the most difficulty reintegrating and offered to share personal memories, positive experiences, peaceful moments, reminders of beauty and joy. They helped each other remember what they were fighting to protect. Ready for final evaluation, Dr. Yanez announced. One by one, each human underwent a comprehensive psychological assessment, not just to verify their return to normal consciousness, but to ensure they had successfully integrated the combat experience without lasting trauma. Cleared for normal duty, came the repeated pronouncements. By the time the process was complete, Kethvar found himself surrounded by 300 humans who showed no signs of having spent the day destroying ships full of assimilated colonists. They were planning recreational activities, discussing personal projects, making social arrangements, but they weren't in denial about what they'd done. When the mission came up in conversation, they discussed it honestly, acknowledged the necessity, processed the emotions, and then moved on to other topics. Observer, Private Chen approached him, her eyes bright with normal human curiosity. What did you think of your first human combat operation? Kethvar looked at this young human who, hours earlier, had stepped over the body of an assimilated teenager without hesitation. Now she was asking his opinion with genuine interest and concern for his feelings. I think, he said carefully, that I understand why the Galactic Council wanted to observe your species. Good impression or bad impression? Kethvar considered this question with the weight it deserved. Both, he said finally. Definitely both. Chen laughed, a sound full of life and humor. Yeah, we get that a lot. 3 days later, Kethvar sat in his quarters aboard the human vessel preparing his report for the Galactic Council. The words came slowly, carefully chosen as he struggled to convey what he had witnessed without sounding like he'd lost his objectivity as an observer. Outside his window, the human colony ship continued its journey to establish a new settlement. The same humans who had systematically destroyed an entire Ravager fleet were now tending gardens, teaching children, conducting scientific research, and creating art. It was like watching a completely different species, but that was exactly the point. His door chimed, and Captain Chen entered at his invitation. She carried 2 cups of what humans called coffee, a stimulant beverage that Kethvar had grown fond of during his stay. Finishing your report? She asked, settling into the chair across from his workspace. Attempting to. I'm finding it difficult to explain what I observed in terms that other species will understand. What's the hardest part to explain? Kethvar gestured to the ship around them. All of this. 3 days ago, I watched your people become something that most species would classify as emotionless killing machines. Today, I observed Private Chen helping a child with mathematical homework while crying over a sad story in a book she was reading. Captain Chen smiled. The same Private Chen who shot 17 assimilated humans without hesitation? The very same. How do I explain that to species who see violence and compassion as mutually exclusive states? Maybe you start with why it matters to us that they're not mutually exclusive. Kethvar looked at her with renewed interest. Meaning? The Ravagers you observed? They're not unique in the galaxy, are they? According to Council records, there are dozens of species that embrace violence as a permanent state, conquering, consuming, destroying everything they encounter. Yes, several species have been classified as permanent threats to galactic stability. And how does the Council typically deal with such threats? Kethvar's tentacles curled uncomfortably. Containment, isolation. In extreme cases, orbital bombardment of their home systems. Genocide. In other words, when absolutely necessary for the protection of other species, yes. Captain Chen leaned forward. Observer, what would have happened if the Council had responded to the Ravager infestation using standard protocols? Kethvar thought about it. A fleet would have been assembled. The infected systems would have been sterilized from orbit. Any possibility of contamination would have been eliminated through complete destruction, including the mining stations with assimilated colonists. Yes, Council doctrine is clear. Ravager assimilation is irreversible. Infected individuals are classified as lost. But you saw our medical teams checking those stations. Dr. Yanez was looking for survivors. The truth hit Kethvar like a physical blow. You believe assimilation can be reversed? We know it can be in early stages. We've developed techniques, treatments, psychological interventions. It's difficult, expensive, and doesn't always work, but it's possible. Chen's expression grew serious. The 3 colonists we found in the sealed medical bay of Station 7 were successfully treated yesterday. They'll make full recoveries. Kethvar stared at her. The Council's approach would have killed them. The Council's approach kills anyone who might potentially be saved because the risk of failure is too great. It's efficient, practical, and completely rational. She paused. It's also exactly what the Ravagers would do. The implications crashed over Kethvar in waves. You're saying the Council's methods turn us into the monsters we're fighting against? Yes. When your only tool for dealing with violence is overwhelming counter-violence, you eventually become indistinguishable from the aggressors. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the stars. That's what makes humans different, observer. We learn to become monsters temporarily, efficiently, and by choice. But we also learn to stop being monsters when the immediate threat is over. Kethvar began to understand. The 1,000-yard stare isn't just a survival mechanism. It's a choice to remain human while doing inhuman things. Exactly. Every human who achieved that mental state during the battle was making a conscious decision. I will become what I need to become to protect what I value. But I will not let that transformation define who I am permanently. And the recovery protocols ensure they can return to their chosen identity. More than that, they ensure the experience of necessary violence doesn't poison their capacity for voluntary compassion. Kethvar turned back to his report, seeing it now with completely different eyes. This wasn't just an assessment of human combat capabilities. It was documentation of an entirely new approach to the fundamental problem that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia. Captain, how many other species are capable of what your people demonstrated? According to our analysis of Council records, none. Most species either evolve as pacifists who can't defend themselves effectively, or as warriors who can't stop fighting long enough to build stable civilizations. And humans? We evolved as persistence hunters, observer. We learned to become whatever we needed to become for as long as we needed to become it, and then returned to being what we chose to be. She smiled. It's a useful adaptation for more than just hunting. That evening, Kethvar completed his report. Instead of a standard tactical assessment, he found himself writing what amounted to a philosophical treatise on the nature of controlled violence and voluntary compassion. His final recommendation surprised even himself. The Galactic Council should not merely accept human membership, but should actively recruit human military advisors and peacekeepers. Their unique psychological adaptability represents a solution to the fundamental problem of dealing with aggressive species without becoming aggressive ourselves. He paused before adding, however, any species working closely with humans should be prepared for significant challenges to their existing worldview. Humans do not fit comfortably into our established categories of behavior. They are simultaneously the most dangerous and most compassionate species I have encountered. This combination appears to be the source of their effectiveness. The day before his scheduled departure, Kethvar received an invitation to observe human colonial operations. He spent hours watching the same warriors who had boarded Ravager vessels now building schools, planting crops, and caring for the 3 rescued colonists. Private Chen, who had killed 17 assimilated humans without hesitation, was teaching recovered colonist Maria Santos to walk again after her partial assimilation. Chen's patience was infinite, her gentleness absolute. How do you do it? Kethvar asked her during a break in the therapy session. Do what? Switch between being a killer and being a healer. Yesterday you were a warrior. Today you're a caregiver. Tomorrow you might need to be a warrior again. Chen considered this question while helping Santos stretch muscles that were still recovering from Ravager modifications. I think about why I fight, she said finally. I don't fight because I like violence. I fight so people like Maria can have the chance to learn to walk again. She looked at the recovering colonist with genuine affection. The day I start enjoying the violence is the day I need to stop being a warrior. The day I stop being willing to commit violence when necessary is the day I stop being able to protect people like Maria. And you can maintain that balance indefinitely? As long as I remember that the violence serves the compassion, not the other way around. She smiled. Plus, we have really good counseling services. When Kethvar finally departed the human vessel, he carried with him more than just a report. He carried a new understanding of what civilization might become if it learned to embrace both strength and mercy, both the capacity for necessary violence and the wisdom to choose peace. His last view of the humans showed them exactly as they were, a species that had learned to become monsters by choice, so they could remain human by nature. As his transport ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying him back to the Galactic Council, Kethvar found himself hoping that other species would be wise enough to learn from what humans had achieved, because if they couldn't learn to control their capacity for violence, they would eventually be controlled by it. And in a galaxy full of threats that required strong responses, that was a luxury no civilized species could afford. The humans had found a third option between pacifism and permanent warfare. The galaxy desperately needed to learn what that option was.